Well, the Senate will finally get its day in court, so to speak, on the heels of several Senate expense scandals. The Supreme Court of Canada will hear arguments from Conservatives on Senate reform from November 12th to 14th. The government hopes to get a green light from the highest court on the constitutionality of their Senate Reform Act, which promises to amend several rules. And Jessica Murphy's in Ottawa tracking that story. Hi, Jessica.
Good morning, Pat. And yeah, with all the headlines that we're seeing about the Senate and this ongoing Senate scandal, Canadians are probably taking a closer look at that upper chamber and wondering what to do with the thing. And in fact, the Supreme Court will indeed hear arguments over 3 days of hearings on exactly that. What are essentially the legal options that Parliament Canada has when it comes to amending, changing, or even abolishing the Senate? Now, Democratic Reform Minister Pierre Poilievre announced that the government yesterday had tabled its own arguments that it will be putting forward to the Supreme Court of Canada in November. They tabled those so-called factums yesterday, and he said it'll really, again, give Canadians and Parliament a clearer view of all their options when it comes to, and powers when it comes to what to do with the Senate. Here he is speaking yesterday on Parliament Hill.
This reference to the Supreme Court will give Canadians a series of legal options and maybe even a how-to guide on how to pursue them. And once we hear back from the top court, we can take direction from Canadians on how to do so.
Now, Poilievre says that despite the fact that the Prime Minister has named some 59 senators to the upper chamber since taking power, he does remain committed to reforming the Senate. And the government has a few legal arguments that it'll be putting forward to Canada's top legal minds. They will argue that Parliament has the power, for example, to set term limits for senators of 8 to 9 years. That's something that they want to do. That it will allow, that they'll allow the provinces to select Senate nominees through what they call a democratic process. That they can change some of what Poilievre called antiquated property qualifications for senators. For now, senators have to have, before they get named to the Senate, $4,000, for example, in net worth, to set up a nationwide process to elect Senate nominees. And then again, they'll argue that they have the power to abolish the Senate without the consent of all the provinces. Now, Poilievre says the government isn't necessarily interested in abolishing the Senate, but they do want to see what all the full range of what these legal options are. Over the 3 days of hearings, we'll of course also hear from other interveners. Provinces, for example, will want to weigh in with their own arguments on what the Supreme Court and the Canadian laws allow them to do. But don't hold your breath on any of this, Pat. There will be the hearings in November. It'll take the Supreme Court anywhere from 10 months to 2 years to look at these options, and after that, again, it's up to the government in power and Canadians to decide what to do with that old institution.
I can't hold my breath that long, Jessica.
No one can, Pat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.